The end of another pandemic school semester or year is within reach for students and educators in this country, but there are already questions about what September will look like. And here's a question that's being bandied about right across the country. Will COVID vaccines be mandatory in schools? CBC News asked thousands of educators right across the country how they feel about that issue as part of our Schooling Under Stress project. Here's the big number. 68%, the vast majority of respondents said they believe it should be required for school staff to be vaccinated. 22% said they disagree. And as far as safety overall, just over half of respondents said they are very concerned about catching COVID on the job, and 85% said they are at least somewhat concerned. But that big number that we began with gives us an opportunity to speak with an employment lawyer. Ryan Watkins is back with us. You saw him earlier in Rob Antle's report. Mr. Watkins is an employment lawyer and litigator in Toronto. Welcome to our program, and I guess welcome back, because we've already heard from you a little bit earlier this hour. Hi, Mr. Watkins.
Hi, thanks for having me, Heather.
That's 68%. Why don't we begin there? One of the big findings from the questionnaire, and again, we sent thousands of questionnaires to employers and administrators and teachers right across the country. 68%, more than two-thirds, say they believe vaccines should be mandatory for school staff. Legally, can employers make that vaccination mandatory?
I believe they can. We've already seen in school settings that there is a mandatory vaccination policy for students for certain vaccines. And we have to start with the premise that under the Occupational Health and Safety Acts among all the provinces, that an employer is required to keep their workforce safe. And when we have a virus like COVID-19 that's turned into a global pandemic and has certainly been contagious and deadly, I believe employers can require their employees to take the vaccine.
And in this case, just to be clear, employer would be school boards, so schools would fall within that category.
That's right.
Okay. Is this a new area of law, or is there established case law on this?
So we've seen cases, and typically we're talking about a mask policy or a vaccination of the flu when I look back at the case law in this area. And so obviously COVID-19 is more contagious, more deadlier than the flu. And the case law has been mixed on a mandatory mask or vaccination policy of the flu. But like I said, I believe because we're dealing with a global pandemic, that the case law would really turn on the fact that we need to get people vaccinated to get over this health pandemic.
Now, what about the rights of employees then in all of this? Could there be exceptions?
Yeah, absolutely. So if an employee has a religious or medical exemption under the Human Rights Code, they would be protected, and they would be able to say to their employer, I'm not going to take the vaccine for these certain exemptions.
Where would teachers' unions come into this, do you think?
So that's the big question. Obviously, teachers' unions are very powerful and have a big say at the table. But I believe, given the survey that we've seen, almost 70% of teachers that want to be vaccinated, obviously teachers' unions will go along with the majority of what their members are saying. So I believe in this case, given that their members want a policy like this, I think we'll see that implemented.
I'm just wondering, we're talking for the purposes of our project, Schooling Under Stress, about teachers and educators and the school systems across the country. But what if we were just to extrapolate from that, what about other types of workplaces?
So we're seeing it across a broad section of sectors. We're seeing it in manufacturing, certainly, where we see a lot of outbreaks. Certainly my clients in the manufacturing and the financial sector have already begun to implement this policy where they require their employees to be vaccinated. So I think we're going to see that across all sectors.
Okay, just interested out of that, although, as I say, we're focusing for this purpose on schooling. Do you foresee many legal challenges over this?
Well, with the law, you always see legal challenges, so I wouldn't be surprised if we do see them. But I think that's a great thing. It helps us understand where the law is and what the boundaries are. So I expect to see challenges, and I frankly welcome them.
I bet that keeps you busy. It's interesting. We'll see where this goes, because so far we're hearing from provinces, for example, like PEI and like Newfoundland and Labrador, that they are not considering making things mandatory at this point. But obviously, as we say, given that questionnaire, there is a push for it, even from the teachers themselves. I thought it was interesting, Mr. Watkins, one of the things that you said in the report from Rob Antle that we aired earlier, that this is one of the hottest topics in employment law right now. And I'm wondering how that's all playing out in your own office and practice. Tell us what's happening there.
Well, you're right. This is the question that everybody is asking, the quote unquote hot topic of employment law. And I'm fielding questions daily on the topic. But, as a lawyer, I welcome those calls, and I welcome navigating employers in this area.
Perhaps more after the conversation this morning. And based on what you're telling us, it seems to me you will say your understanding of the law as it exists right now is an employer would be allowed to make this mandatory given the concerns. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.